Chapter 41. That night after dinner, I helped my mother with the dishes by the well. My aunt's family clustered inside Moonlight's room with a doctor. On the ground next to us, a candle dripped its red, waxy tears onto a bronze dish. Its weak light sputtered in the thick darkness, showing just enough contrast for my mother to see what she was doing. The rain had stopped, and the water inside the well was like black ink. Each time I dropped the bucket to scoop up some water, it made a wet sound. As the pail moved upward, pulled by old ropes on squeaking wheels, the noise reverberated like a moan. After filling up the basin, I sat down beside my mother. "Mother, can I ask you something?" "Sure," she said. "Do you remember anything about my father?" She paused. Her long hair covered most of her face, hiding her expression from view. "I remember some," she said, turning back to the dishes. "What is he like?" My mother wiped her hands on the rag she kept on her side and looked up. In the dim light, her eyes were as dark and mysterious as the well. "It has been so many years," she said. "Why do you want to know now?" "I don't know," I said with a shrug. "Just wondering. Everyone has a father. I want to know whether or not mine exists. That's all." "He exists just fine, somewhere in America." "Does he know about me, Mother?" "Yes, son. You were 3 months old when he left." "Mom, how did you meet him?" My mother stretched her arms upward and moaned softly, complaining about a dull ache she felt on her back. In the shadow of the night, everything around us seemed calm. At the same time, the temperature was dropping. In a soft, whispering voice, as though she were talking to herself, my mother told me her story. "I was supposed to get married to a son of your grandfather's friend. In those days, there was no such thing as marrying for love, and matches were prearranged. The night before the wedding, I sneaked out to see the groom's face, with the help of your late uncle, of course. We hid behind a bamboo bush outside his house for 2 hours before I could get a good look at his face for the first time. Good heavens, was he ugly. I cried like my daddy had just died. It was awful, the thought of living with that man for the rest of my life. So that same night, your uncle, barely your age then, took me to the bus station and sent me off to Saigon." "Mother, weren't you afraid?" "Afraid? I was terrified, but I was also determined. Your grandfather was so mad. He beat the tar out of your uncle and then went to Saigon to look for me. By the time he got there, I had a job in a jewelry store working as a hand model. I refused to go home, so your grandfather had to apologize to the groom's family and call off the wedding. It was a real scandal, and I was lucky that he didn't disown me for what I did. Then, a couple months later, the Americans came to Vietnam. Everybody in the South took English classes so that they could get a better job working for the foreigners and getting paid in dollars instead of dong. I was inspired by their sophisticated culture, so I went back to night school and learned English. I met your father in Saigon through an ad in a newspaper. Your daddy was looking for a translator, so I came for an interview and ended up spending the night. He was tall, dark, and handsome, just like a movie star. He swept me off my feet. You know the rest of the story. We moved back to Nha Trang, and I got pregnant. The following year, I gave birth to you." In front of us, the dishes had been washed, dried, and stacked on a tray. She went on, her voice low and mournful. 3 months after you were born, he left Vietnam. Your father was very upset that he had to leave you behind. In fact, he offered to take you with him, but I refused. You have a good father, Kian, just like everybody else. And for the short time that he was here with us, he loved you very much." "What's his name?" My mother sucked in a deep breath. I don't remember. How could you not? You were living with him. He was my boss, she explained. I called him by his last name, just like everybody else in the company. Mr. Russo this, Mr. Russo that. Have you any idea how many years ago that was? I am forced to forget about these things. I bet my father would remember your name, I said sarcastically. My mother burst out laughing. I seriously doubt that. He never knew my real name. He used to call me Nancy Kwan. Names weren't important to us. It was the 60s, for God's sake. Do you believe that he thinks about us sometimes? I asked. Sure he does. Does he still want me? My mother furrowed her eyebrows. I don't know, son, but if I were he, I certainly would. Any parent would be proud of you, Kian. You are a good son. I got up and touched her hair gently. Thanks, Mother. That evening, after everybody else had gone to bed, I got up and poured some oil into the old lantern. On my new bed, which was made out of discarded rice sacks Tin had brought back from his company, I drafted a letter to my father. Even with the help of an English-Vietnamese dictionary, and with my limited knowledge of English grammar that I learned in school, the foreign language was more difficult than I had imagined. Under the dim light, I struggled to convey what I wanted him to know, wondering whether or not he would understand. Dear Mr. Russo, I am your son from Vietnam. You don't know me yet. My name is Kien Nguyen, and I am 14 years old. I was born May 12, 1967. You left Nha Trang, Vietnam, on August, same year. It was an exciting time this morning when I found your address. I have looked for you many years before. I think of you every day, and I want to meet you. Please take me to America. I have nothing to live for in Vietnam. I am always hungry and unhappy. I don't have new clothes or blanket. I am sleeping on 2 rice sacks because I have no bed. After many rains, lots of mosquitoes around, and the weather gets very cold at night. You may remember about that since you lived here before. Please write. I want to hear from you. I can't send you any picture because I don't have it yet. Nancy Kwan says hello to you. She also said you love me and you will take care of me. I want very much for her to be right. Your son, Kian Nguyen. I read the letter over and over, trying to correct as many mistakes as I could before I put it in an envelope. Then, exhausted from my euphoria and hope, I fell asleep holding the letter close to my chest. The next morning, I woke up early. I jumped out of bed, intending to show Moonlight the letter. On my way to my aunt's house, my mother stopped me at the kitchen. She was holding a pair of wooden chopsticks. Behind her, a pan of fried rice sizzled over the kiln. From inside my aunt's house, someone struck a gong 3 times, and the sound echoed through the morning air. Monks in yellow robes appeared at her front steps between the rose bushes. Where are you going? My mother asked. I'm going to see Moonlight. Don't. Please stay here, she said sadly. Moonlight passed away last night. Do not disturb her family. I staggered to sit down, dizzy and numb from the news. Outside, white clouds and beautiful morning sun had replaced the rain. Lights sparkled on the soggy ground as if to announce summer was here at last. Sometime later, I got up from the floor and stepped out of the kitchen. Sitting at my aunt's dinner table, my grandfather seemed lost in thought. In front of him, a cup of tea was left untouched. In the garden, my uncle, with the help of the monks, released the latch on his birdcage and let go about 100 sparrows. Their wings fluttered under the bright sun before they disappeared from sight. Outside Moonlight's room, my aunt collapsed on the floor, hitting her head against the cement threshold in frustration. Her wail was blood-curdling and painful as her daughters huddled next to her. The moment she saw my face, my aunt stopped crying, got up, and lunged at me. I want to know what she said to you last night, she said. Who? I lied. I don't know what you're talking about. My daughter, Moonlight, she pressed. What sort of things did she tell you last night? I can't tell you, Auntie, I stammered. It's confidential. Why not? She wailed. I am her mother. Tell me. I can't. I promised her. Besides, it isn't important anymore. The anger crept back in her eyes, and Pink pulled her away from me. Not important? My aunt cried. How dare you? She hung on for weeks, waiting for your return so she could tell you something. How dare you not confide in me what my daughter said? I shook my head and ran away. In the garden, I encountered Mr. Kiba on his way to my aunt's kitchen. Hey, congratulations, he said. You're back. Yes, sir. Great. I got news for you. I talked to your dean the other day. He wanted me to tell you to enjoy the summer. Next semester, you can go back to school. There will be no penalty after the faculty has evaluated your conduct. Thank you, sir. I looked at his face. Or should I ask my mother to thank you for me? His smile disappeared. You ungrateful mongrel, he snapped. Your mother's a nobody. Who do you think she is, Queen of Sheba? And you stay away from my daughter. She is out of your league. You are a smart boy. Don't make me one of your enemies, son. If not because of my mother, why would you help me? He waved his hand. Get out of here. I am sick of you. I walked past him and headed to the post office to mail my father the letter. 3 months later, one Saturday morning, the postman came looking for me. He handed me an envelope, which I recognized immediately. The letter had returned to me unopened after traveling around the world. A red stamp slashed across my father's address, accompanied by the words, Return to sender, address unknown.